I'm Liza, 26, and the moment my stepdad slammed his laptop shut and said, "Women aren't cut out for finance," my stomach dropped. I wasn't just his stepdaughter. I was the one who'd helped track every dollar in our family. That day, I realized the numbers weren't the only thing I was being shut out of. Where are you watching from? Comment below and subscribe for more family drama, revenge, and emotional courage stories. The day it happened didn't start with shouting or slammed doors. It started quietly, which somehow made it worse. I remember the hum of the old ceiling fan in the dining room, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air, and my stepdad's laptop open at the head of the table like it owned the place. Numbers filled the screen, rows and columns I recognized instantly because I had helped organize them. Those numbers weren't just data to me. They were proof that I belonged in that room. I'm Liza, and at 26, I'd spent the better part of 2 years helping my family keep its financial life from falling apart. When my mom married Ron, he came with confidence, opinions, and a loud belief that experience mattered more than effort. Still, he was the one who first asked me to help track expenses when things got tight. I built spreadsheets late at night after my retail shifts, double-checking totals while everyone slept. Back then, he called me detail-oriented. That morning, he called me something else entirely. I pulled out a chair and sat down, notebook in hand, ready to go over the monthly breakdown. Ron didn't look up. He clicked his mouse, eyes fixed on the screen, jaw tight like he'd already made a decision. My mom hovered near the counter, pretending to wipe a clean surface, her shoulders stiff. I should have noticed the signs, but I was too focused on the numbers I wanted to discuss. I ran through the utilities and groceries, I said carefully. There's room to adjust if we move. Ron finally looked at me. Not angry, not calm, just dismissive. I've got it handled. That was new. Usually he let me finish. I waited a beat, then tried again, pointing to the notebook. I noticed the investment account took a dip last quarter. I think if we rebalance. He shut the laptop with a sharp snap that echoed through the room. Liza, he said, slow and firm, this isn't something you need to worry about. My chest tightened. I've been worrying about it because you asked me to. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, like this was a lesson he'd been waiting to teach. I asked for help organizing receipts. That's different from managing a portfolio. The word hit harder than I expected. Portfolio. As if the moment I understood it, I'd crossed an invisible line. My mom glanced at me, then away like she didn't want to choose a side. I'm not trying to take over, I said. I just want to help make smarter choices. Ron shook his head, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Women aren't cut out for finance. It's not personal. It's just how it is. The room felt smaller after that. The fan above us kept spinning, completely unbothered. I felt my face heat up, a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I'd heard comments like that before, from customers, from coworkers, but never from someone who trusted me with every account password. I laughed, a short, awkward sound I couldn't stop. You're serious? Dead serious, he replied. I don't want you involved in this anymore. Just like that, it was over. No discussion. No acknowledgement of the hours I'd spent balancing budgets or catching errors he'd missed. I was dismissed from the table where I'd earned my seat. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping the floor. My mom finally spoke. Ron, maybe she's just trying to. He raised a hand, cutting her off. I said, I've got it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about control. About who got to speak and who was expected to listen quietly from the sidelines. I walked to my room, closing the door behind me, and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. My phone buzzed with a notification from my bank app, my personal savings account, the one I'd grown on my own. I opened it and felt a strange sense of comfort seeing the balance. Those numbers were mine. No one could shut me out of them. Memories flooded back of the first time Ron praised my work. How proud I'd felt. How eager I was to prove myself. I wondered when that shifted, when competence turned into a threat. Maybe it always had been. Later that afternoon, I overheard Ron on the phone, his voice confident, throwing around terms I understood perfectly. I caught a mistake in his explanation, a small one but enough to matter. My instinct was to correct him. Instead, I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed, but because I was done offering help where it wasn't wanted. At dinner, the tension hung thick. My mom avoided my eyes. Ron talked about the market like nothing had happened. I nodded when appropriate, my fork pushing food around my plate. Every word he spoke felt like salt in a fresh cut. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheets I'd saved. I reviewed them not for him but for myself. I saw patterns, opportunities, and risks he hadn't mentioned. A calm determination settled over me. If I couldn't be part of the conversation in that house, I'd start a new one elsewhere. Being shut out hurt, but it also clarified something important. Respect isn't given based on titles or age. It's earned through effort and understanding. And the moment someone tells you that you don't belong, that's the moment you decide how much their opinion really matters. As I closed my laptop, I made myself a quiet promise. The numbers didn't scare me. Being underestimated didn't either. What scared me was staying silent. And that was something I was no longer willing to do. I closed my laptop and leaned back against the headboard, the quiet promise I just made to myself still settling in my chest. Outside my bedroom door, life went on as if nothing had shifted. Footsteps moved down the hallway. The television clicked on. The house breathed normally. Even though something fundamental had changed for me, I wasn't part of the inner circle anymore. I was officially on the outside. The next morning made that clear in ways I hadn't expected. I woke up early out of habit, brewed my coffee, and walked toward the dining table without thinking. Then I stopped. Ron was already there, laptop open again, papers spread out wider than before. This time there was no empty chair waiting for me. He didn't even glance up when I passed through the room. I poured my coffee and leaned against the counter, pretending to scroll through my phone while listening. His voice was confident, almost rehearsed, as he spoke to someone on speaker. He used phrases I recognized and others he clearly didn't fully understand. I noticed how often he paused, how he filled silence with authority instead of clarity. From where I stood, it was obvious he was guessing. My mom entered quietly, kissed his cheek, and slid a plate of toast next to him. She glanced at me just for a second before looking away. That look stayed with me longer than it should have. It wasn't anger or agreement. It was discomfort. Like she knew something was off but didn't know how to challenge it. I carried my coffee back to my room, closing the door softly behind me. Sitting on the bed, I realized how strange it felt to observe instead of participate. For so long I'd been involved in every decision, every adjustment. Now I was a spectator in my own home. Over the next few days that distance grew. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Financial mail that used to be left on the table disappeared into Ron's briefcase. Even casual comments changed. When my mom mentioned cutting back on groceries, Ron responded with a dismissive wave, telling her he'd already accounted for it. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out the flaw in that logic. Watching from the sidelines gave me a different perspective. Without my input, decisions became louder but not smarter. Ron spoke more, explained less, and seemed more concerned with being right than being careful. I started noticing patterns, how he brushed off questions, how he avoided specifics, how he leaned on confidence when facts would have served better. One afternoon, I overheard him arguing with someone on the phone, his voice sharper than usual. He stepped outside, but the open window carried his frustration back inside. Words like unexpected and temporary floated through the air. My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. It was the sound of numbers not behaving. Later that evening, my mom knocked on my door. She stood there for a moment before speaking, hands folded together. "You've been quiet lately," she said. I shrugged. "There's not much to say." She hesitated, then stepped inside, sitting on the edge of my bed. "Ron thinks it's better this way. Less stress for you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered when protecting me had started to look like excluding me. "Does he think that?" I asked gently. "Or do you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she smoothed out an invisible wrinkle on the bedspread. "I just want peace," she said finally. That word, peace, echoed in my head long after she left. From the outside, I could see how easily peace was confused with silence, how quickly harmony became compliance. As days passed, I noticed the house felt different, tighter. Conversations carried an edge, even when no one raised their voice. Ron spent more time locked away with his laptop, emerging irritated and distracted. My mom tiptoed around him, adjusting her tone, her schedule, even her expectations. I started taking longer walks after work, needing space to think. On one of those walks, I ran into Mrs. Callahan from down the street. She asked how things were going, and I surprised myself by almost telling her the truth. Instead, I smiled and said everything was fine. From the outside, that's what it probably looked like. Being shut out forced me to listen more than I spoke. I noticed how Ron talked about money not as a tool but as a weapon. How he used it to assert authority, to end discussions, to remind everyone who was in charge. I'd never seen it so clearly when I was involved. One evening I sat on the stairs while Ron and my mom talked in the living room, unaware I was there. He complained about too many opinions and unnecessary input. My mom responded softly, suggesting maybe collaboration wouldn't hurt. His reply was quick and final. This is why things get complicated. I felt a strange mix of sadness and clarity. From the outside it was obvious. This wasn't about skill or knowledge. It was about control and image. About who got credit and who stayed invisible. I began to journal at night, writing down what I observed. Not numbers but behaviors. Patterns of speech. Shifts in mood. The way power moved through the house. It felt like studying a system from a distance, seeing flaws that were hidden when you were inside it. There were moments I almost stepped back in. Times when I wanted to warn them, to correct a mistake before it grew. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was self-respect. Or maybe I needed to see how this played out without me cushioning the impact. One weekend Ron invited a friend over, someone he clearly wanted to impress. I listened from the kitchen as he boasted about managing everything himself. The confidence in his voice was practiced, polished. From the outside it sounded convincing. From where I stood, knowing the cracks beneath the surface, it sounded fragile. That night, lying in bed, I realized how much I'd changed. Being excluded had sharpened my awareness. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was observant. Detached in a way that allowed me to see the truth without emotion clouding it. What I saw from the outside looking in wasn't flattering. It was a system built on ego instead of collaboration. On assumptions instead of understanding. And for the first time I understood that stepping back hadn't made me smaller. It had given me clarity. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me, and understood something important. Distance doesn't always mean loss. Sometimes it gives you the angle you need to see everything exactly as it is. Distance doesn't always mean disengagement. As I lay there listening to the house settle, that truth followed me into the next morning and every quiet moment after. I didn't step back into the dining room. I didn't ask questions. But I didn't stop paying attention either. Instead, I opened a new file on my laptop and gave it a simple name. Nothing dramatic. Just a place to think clearly. I started small. Notes about grocery runs, utility changes, small cash withdrawals I overheard Ron mention in passing. Not because I planned to confront him but because I needed something steady. Something grounded in facts when emotions felt too slippery. The ledger became my anchor. A private record of what I saw, heard, and understood. First it felt almost silly. Writing things down that I wasn't supposed to know anymore. But as days turned into weeks, patterns emerged. Tiny inconsistencies. Decisions that didn't line up with outcomes. I noticed how often Ron talked about being ahead, yet stressed over things that shouldn't have surprised him. I tracked timing, not totals. Cause and effect, not blame. I worked on it late at night, when the house was quiet and no one questioned why my light was still on. The glow of the screen felt comforting. This was my space again. No interruptions. No dismissive comments. Just clarity. One evening I heard Ron pacing in the living room, his footsteps heavy and uneven. My mom's voice followed, calm but strained. I didn't mean to listen, but the walls were thin. He complained about something being off. About numbers not matching expectations. I wrote down the date and what little I caught. Not judgment. Observation. The ledger wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about trusting myself again. About reminding myself that I wasn't imagining the gaps. That my instincts still worked even if no one asked for them. I added context too. Emotional notes. Days when Ron seemed unusually confident, only to grow quiet later. Times when my mom skipped a bill discussion entirely, choosing instead to talk about errands or weather. Money had become a shadow topic, always present, never directly addressed. Once, while helping clean the garage, I spotted a box labeled Statements. It was pushed far back, half forgotten. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The fact that it was hidden told me enough. I wrote that down too. Keeping the ledger gave me a strange sense of peace. I wasn't powerless anymore. I was prepared. Even if no one ever saw these pages, they mattered to me. They reminded me that being excluded didn't erase my capability. There were moments I questioned myself, wondered if I was being petty or holding on to something I should let go of. But every time doubt crept in, something happened that reinforced my choice. A late fee mentioned too casually. A conversation cut short. A plan changed without explanation. One afternoon, Ron asked me to print something for him. Just a document. Nothing financial, he said. As I stood by the printer, I glimpsed a page he hadn't meant me to see. A figure jumped out immediately, not because it was alarming, but because it contradicted what he'd claimed earlier that week. I didn't say a word. I handed him the papers and went back to my room, heart pounding, fingers itching to open my laptop. That night I added another entry. Carefully, calmly. The ledger was becoming more than notes. It was a mirror. One he didn't know existed. I started color-coding entries, not for drama, but for clarity. Green for confirmed information. Yellow for assumptions. Red for contradictions. Seeing it laid out like that made everything sharper. The story told itself without commentary. My mom noticed my quiet focus one evening and asked what I was working on. Just organizing my own stuff, I said honestly. She nodded, relieved, and changed the subject. Part of me wondered if she suspected more. If she sensed that I hadn't truly stepped away. But she never asked. The hardest part was resisting the urge to intervene. To save them from mistakes I could see forming. But I'd learned something important from being shut out. Advice given without respect only breeds resentment. So I stayed silent and kept writing. I realized then that the ledger wasn't just about Ron. It was about me reclaiming my voice internally, even if it stayed unspoken for now. About building confidence quietly instead of seeking approval loudly. There was power in that restraint. In knowing I could speak but choosing when. In understanding the full picture before reacting to a single moment. As weeks passed, my entries grew more precise. Less emotional. More factual. I was evolving alongside the ledger. Sharpening my patience, trusting timing over impulse. One night I closed my laptop and sat back, realizing how far I'd come. I wasn't the same person who'd been dismissed at the dining table. I was steadier now, more aware, less desperate to be seen. The ledger he never knew I kept wasn't a weapon. It was a shield, a quiet record of truth in a house that preferred confidence over accuracy. And as I lay down to sleep, I knew one thing for sure. When the time came, I wouldn't be scrambling for answers. I already had them. The night I realized the truth couldn't stay hidden began quietly, almost innocuously. I was in my room, laptop open, reviewing the ledger for the 100th time, making sure every number, every note, every discrepancy was in its rightful place. I wasn't planning to confront anyone that evening. I didn't even plan to bring it up at all. I just needed to organize the chaos in my mind and in my hidden records. But the universe, as it often does, had a different plan. A sharp knock at the door made me jump. It was my mom, looking pale and nervous, holding a stack of papers in her hands. "Liza, you need to see this," she whispered, her voice trembling like she was carrying a weight too heavy for one person. She didn't enter. She just stood there, motioning for me to follow her to the dining room. The papers were Ron's investment statements, several months' worth, with glaring inconsistencies I had noted weeks before but hadn't mentioned. My stomach twisted when I saw them. The numbers were wrong, drastically so, and the errors weren't random. Someone had been mismanaging, or worse, misrepresenting the finances intentionally. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, my mind racing through the ledger I had so meticulously kept. Every yellow highlight, every red note, every observation that had seemed trivial suddenly became a roadmap pointing straight to the truth. My hands shook slightly as I spread the statements out on the table next to my laptop. The faint hum of the ceiling fan above felt louder now, as if it were echoing the tension filling the room. My mom's eyes darted between the papers and me, silently begging for validation, for understanding. I nodded once, my voice barely above a whisper. I kept track of all of this. I knew. Her relief was immediate. almost visible in the way her shoulders slumped. I knew I wasn't imagining things, that he wasn't being honest, she said. But seeing it, that's different. I swallowed hard, thinking about how long this had been brewing. Weeks of observing, documenting, quietly noting patterns, and yet, never confronting him. I realized the ledger had done more than track numbers. It had given me patience and proof at the same time. And now that proof demanded action. The next morning I made a decision. I had to confront Ron, but I couldn't let anger or fear drive me. I rehearsed quietly, running through every line I would say, every fact I would present. My mom offered to be there, but I asked her to wait in the living room. This was between him and me first. She could intervene if needed, but I wanted to see the truth reflected in his own eyes before anyone else. I found him in the study, pretending to review a report. His expression was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes from being unaware, or confident that no one is watching closely enough. "Ron," I said, my voice steady but firm. He looked up, eyebrows raising. "We need to talk." He gestured for me to sit, his tone polite but edged with impatience. I placed the ledger and the statement side by side on the desk, letting them speak before I did. "I've been keeping track," I began. "And there are discrepancies in your accounts. Patterns that don't match what you've been reporting." I didn't pause, didn't let him interrupt. "Some numbers are off by thousands, and they don't line up with deposits, withdrawals, or investments." For a moment he just stared, expression unreadable. Then a flicker of something passed through his eyes, surprise, maybe panic. "Liza, he started, but I held up my hand. "Please, let me finish." I went through the entries, showing him how the ledger lined up with reality, step by step, day by day. I could see his confidence wobble just slightly, but enough to make my point. "This isn't just a mistake," I continued. "It's a series of miscalculations, oversights, or maybe something intentional. But the truth is visible now. You can't hide it anymore." He ran a hand over his face, sighing deeply, and for the first time I caught a glimpse of vulnerability. The man who had dismissed me, shut me out, told me I wasn't cut out for finance, was suddenly confronted with evidence he couldn't ignore. I noticed the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed nervously against the desk. He had been found out. "You've kept this?" he asked, voice quieter than usual. I nodded. "Every note, every observation, every irregularity." There was a long silence. Then he leaned back, the kind of slow, deliberate movement that felt like recalibration. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" he asked, genuinely curious, almost vulnerable. I looked him in the eye, steady as ever. "Because you wouldn't have listened. You never did. And I wanted to be sure. I wanted to be right." His expression shifted again, harder to read this time. Pride, shame, defensiveness, and a strange respect all rolled into one. "And you've been watching all this time," he said. "Careful. Silent." "Yes," I said, the word firm, resolute. "Watching, documenting, and learning. Not just about numbers, Ron, but about how things work when people think they're invisible." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that statement settle. "I didn't realize," he admitted quietly. And in that one admission, I understood that the ledger had done its work. The truth couldn't stay hidden, and now it had found a voice, even if mine had been quiet for weeks. From that moment on, the dynamic shifted. He stopped pretending he knew it all. He began to ask questions, hesitant at first but genuinely this time. My mom watched from the living room doorway, her expression a mix of relief and cautious hope. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth had done the talking. The weeks that followed were delicate. Ron admitted to mismanagement in a few areas, and we corrected errors together. For the first time, I was invited back into discussions, but not as a subordinate or an outsider. I was part of the solution. Watching from the outside had given me perspective, yes, but now participating with that knowledge gave me power. Not power over him, but over the situation. The ledger remained with me, a quiet companion, but it was no longer just a secret. I occasionally referenced it, reminding myself of the patience and attention it had taken to gather the truth. It was a roadmap of observation, a record of resilience. Every page, every entry was proof that quiet diligence could uncover reality, even when others tried to hide it. The turning point wasn't dramatic. No shouting, No confrontation in front of witnesses. It was subtle. The way Ron paused before making a decision. The way my mom's tone softened. The way the house felt lighter, almost cautiously optimistic. The truth had surfaced not with a crash, but with persistence, with careful observation and unwavering attention to detail. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something fundamental. Truth has a way of surfacing, even when ignored, even when hidden. You don't always need to force it. It finds a way when patience and diligence meet reality. I had waited. I had watched. I had kept careful notes. And in the end, the ledger, my silent record, ensured that the truth could no longer stay hidden anymore. I looked around the house that evening, watching Ron and my mom discuss financial plans, cautiously and openly, and felt a sense of calm. Not just because the numbers were being corrected, but because honesty had been restored. Transparency had been reintroduced. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I belonged. Not because I had claimed my place with words, but because I had earned it through observation, precision, and quiet resilience. The truth had found its way to the surface, unstoppable now, and in that revelation, I found not just vindication but empowerment. The ledger he never knew I kept had fulfilled its purpose. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt truly seen, not just for my work with numbers, but for my patience, insight, and the strength to let the truth emerge on its own. The morning sunlight streamed through the half-open blinds, cutting the quiet of the house into sharp lines across the floor. I stood by the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, watching Ron carefully review the spreadsheets we had corrected together the night before. For the first time in weeks, the air between us felt lighter. Not free of tension certainly, but lighter in a way that suggested recognition. The ledger I had kept in secret had done its job. The truth had surfaced, and with it came the opportunity to reclaim my place. Not through confrontation or force, but through patience, proof, and persistence. I took a sip of coffee and let the warmth settle in, grounding me. I knew that reclaiming my place wouldn't be about proving him wrong anymore. That was done. It was about reclaiming my confidence, my voice, and the space I was always meant to occupy. I had learned the hard way that bitterness is easy to harbor but nearly impossible to hide. I refused to let resentment shape my return. Instead, I focused on clarity, what I could control, what I could influence, and how to assert myself calmly without letting anger lead. That morning, I walked over and placed my hand on the edge of the dining table, careful to meet Ron's eyes without hesitation. "I've updated the projections for next quarter," I said. Not aggressively, not apologetically, just matter-of-factly. "Here's what I think could work." He glanced at me, and I saw a subtle shift, hesitation but also acknowledgement. "Show me," he said quietly. I opened the spreadsheet on my laptop and walked him through the adjustments I had calculated. I spoke clearly, backing up every suggestion with data and notes from the ledger. I didn't embellish. I didn't try to sound dominant. I simply spoke with certainty, letting the numbers speak through me. After a few minutes, he nodded. Not the dismissive nod of before, but one that carried consideration. "I see your point," he admitted. "That could prevent some mistakes I might have overlooked." I exhaled silently, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just slightly. That acknowledgement, small as it was proof that I could reclaim my place without lowering myself into anger or competition. In the days that followed, I continued participating in discussions, this time on my terms. I didn't fight for space aggressively. I claimed it naturally through preparation, attention to detail, and steady contribution. I realized that taking back my place wasn't about dominating the conversation or proving superiority. It was about being consistent, calm, and reliable. The ledger had been my shield, but my consistency would be my bridge. One afternoon, as I was reviewing the monthly bills, Ron asked a question I had anticipated. "Do we have any irregular expenses I should be aware of?" I smiled slightly, not smugly, just with a quiet satisfaction. "Actually, yes," I said, explaining with precision the one-time medical expense and a billing error I had discovered. He listened, really listened, for the first time in months. I felt the dynamic shift subtly under my feet, the balance of respect tilting gently in my favor. It wasn't all smooth. There were moments when old habits resurfaced. Ron would dismiss a suggestion before thinking it through, or attempt to reclaim control in ways that reminded me of past frustrations. But I refused to respond with bitterness. Instead, I took a breath, reminded myself of the ledger, and responded with facts and patience. I realized that reclaiming my place didn't require me to win every argument. It required me to remain steady, consistent, and unshakably confident in my capabilities. I also made sure to rebuild trust with my mom. The tension that had existed between us, unspoken but palpable, slowly began to fade. She started including me in household decisions again, seeking my input genuinely rather than defensively. The three of us began to talk more openly, discussing finances, household responsibilities, and plans for the future. I noticed how small gestures, asking my opinion, acknowledging my work, built a renewed sense of collaboration and mutual respect. There was one pivotal moment that marked the turning point for me. We had a financial review scheduled, a small routine check-in, but it carried more weight now than ever before. Ron had to present an investment summary to a distant relative online, and I offered to prepare the slides. He hesitated briefly, then nodded. As I compiled the information, I felt a sense of empowerment. I wasn't doing this to prove him wrong or to assert dominance. I was doing it because I had earned the trust and responsibility to contribute meaningfully. I prepared every detail meticulously, anticipating questions, calculating projections, and noting potential pitfalls. When the virtual meeting began, I presented with calm authority. Ron didn't interrupt once. He didn't overshadow me. For the first time, he allowed me to take the lead without fear of challenge. Afterward, he looked at me quietly. "You handled that perfectly," he said, his tone almost unguarded. I nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without letting pride twist into arrogance. "Thanks," I said simply. The moment wasn't about praise. It was about affirmation that my place had been restored through competence, patience, and integrity. I began to notice changes in my own behavior too. I wasn't defensive or anxious when discussions arose. I didn't feel the need to preemptively prove myself. The confidence that had been simmering quietly in the ledger translated into calm assurance in real life. I realized that taking back my place without becoming bitter was as much about inner transformation as it was about outward recognition. There were subtle reminders of the past that tested me. A miscalculated bill, a dismissive comment, or even the memory of that first day I was shut out could have triggered anger. But I used those moments to reaffirm my approach. I would act with precision, respond with clarity, and avoid letting resentment color my decisions. I wanted my return to be defined by competence and calm, not vindictiveness. My relationships at home improved gradually. My mom and I started sharing small responsibilities more evenly. She began asking for my opinion on things beyond finances: meal planning, household purchases, even scheduling family events. Each small gesture was a reminder that respect and inclusion could grow from quiet observation and consistent effort, not confrontation or bitterness. Ron too began to show subtle shifts. He asked for my input more often, no longer with hesitation, but with genuine interest. Occasionally, I could see him glancing at the ledger I kept in my mind, realizing that my observations were accurate, and that my presence strengthened the household rather than challenged his authority. The tension that had filled the house for months slowly began to dissipate, replaced by collaboration and cautious trust. One rainy evening, I sat by the window watching the drop streak across the glass. The house felt different. The dynamic had changed not through arguments or resentment, but through the quiet assertion of knowledge, patience, and integrity. I reflected on the journey, the initial exclusion, the quiet observation, the ledger, and finally the subtle reclaiming of my place. Each step had required restraint, focus, and faith in my own capabilities. I realized that taking back my place without becoming bitter didn't mean I ignored the past. It meant I learned from it, used it to strengthen myself, and allowed it to guide my actions without letting it dictate my emotions. It was a delicate balance, asserting authority without arrogance, claiming recognition without resentment, participating without dominating. I began mentoring small aspects of household finances more openly. I created a system where Ron and I collaborated, each checking the other's work, ensuring transparency and accuracy. My mom observed, sometimes interjecting, sometimes quietly taking notes. The house felt cooperative for the first time in years. I had returned not as an outsider, but as a respected contributor, fully present, yet untouched by bitterness. One night, while updating the ledger, now more a reference than a secret journal, I smiled softly. I realized that reclaiming my place had been more about personal growth than restoring control. The ledger, the observation, and the truth had not only vindicated me but had strengthened my ability to act calmly and wisely. I had taken back my place without letting anger or resentment define me. It wasn't just about finances anymore. It was about self-respect, resilience, and measured action. I had learned that influence and respect are earned quietly through consistency, honesty, and patience. I had proven that stepping back and observing could be more powerful than rushing forward in anger. By the end of the week, our household meetings had transformed. Discussions flowed with respect and focus. Ron no longer dominated or dismissed, and I contributed without hesitation or defensiveness. My mom smiled more often, relieved to see the household dynamic finally balanced. And I, more than anything, felt a sense of quiet pride, not in being right, but in reclaiming my space thoughtfully, strategically, and without the corrosive weight of bitterness. In the days that followed, I continued to refine my contributions. I introduced minor improvements in budgeting, anticipated potential financial pitfalls, and suggested ways to make our planning more efficient. Each suggestion was accepted and incorporated, further cementing my role as an integral part of the family's financial decisions. It wasn't about asserting dominance, it was about collaboration, earned through persistence and steady competence. I understood finally that bitterness would have been an easy path. Anger could have fueled immediate satisfaction, confrontations could have forced acknowledgement, and resentment might have made me feel justified. But I chose restraint, clarity, and patience. That choice not only preserved relationships but elevated them, showing that strength lies in measured, thoughtful action rather than impulsive reaction. By the time I closed my laptop that evening, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. I had taken back my place fully without compromise to my integrity. I had reestablished respect, rebuilt trust, and created an environment where my voice mattered. Not because it demanded attention, but because it had proven its value quietly, persistently, and patiently. The journey had taught me lessons far beyond finances, about patience, resilience, communication, and the subtle power of truth. Taking back my place without becoming bitter wasn't just about restoring authority, it was about restoring myself. And in that restoration, I found a sense of balance, confidence, and inner peace that no exclusion or dismissal could ever take away. From that point onward, I approached every decision with calm assurance, knowing that my place was not just recognized, it was earned. And I knew that no ledger, no misstep, and no attempt at exclusion could ever remove it again.